the Israeli Armed Forces, the IDF, is in Lebanon. Now, we're waiting to see if they're going to capture any villages or any specific towns. They have called for evacuation of a large swaths of villages and towns as the bombing picks up, and recon missions have started, special forces missions have started. And if you're still doubting the entrance of Israeli armed forces into Lebanon, here is a picture that has been geolocated of an Israeli tank in Lebanon. If you see one of these Merkavas in Lebanon, it's not Hezbollah's. It can't be. They don't got these. So we know that they are in Lebanon. We also know that they have taken casualties already. There was a Hezbollah ambush that ended up killing 7 soldiers. I think now the number has been bumped up to 8. That has killed 8 Israeli servicemen, which is the first casualties of the ground war in southern Lebanon as the Israelis begin clashes with Hezbollah in the region and start to move in for what they have declared as a quote-unquote limited operation to destroy Hezbollah infrastructure so they can try to bring back the 50 to 70,000 people that have been displaced from northern Israel. But I don't expect these to be the last corpses that come back from this. Hezbollah has been preparing for years. And, you know, Nasrallah got taken out, and Hezbollah had that issue with the pagers and the radios, which not only did damage to the membership, the rank and file of Hezbollah, but also did probably damage to the public confidence in Hezbollah. If you were thinking about joining Hezbollah, and then you find out everybody you know that joined Hezbollah just had a piece of their ass blown out by a pager, it's probably making you reconsider your employment options slightly. It would make me reconsider my employment options, and I think it would to most people. And even if you support Hezbollah, you can always do that from a distance. And so after that L and that L and that L, the assassination in Tehran of the political leader of Hamas, and now this massive escalation of the bombing campaign, some people have come to the conclusion of, well, maybe Hezbollah is much weaker than we thought. And that is certainly a possibility. The death of Nasrallah and the massive bombing campaign and the success of these Israeli operations, like the pager ones, does make me think that Hezbollah, of course, and this should be kind of obvious, does not live up to the propaganda. But that does not mean that if you have since like 2007, 2008, like since the 2006 war, in order to build up defenses along the border, build tunnels, build entrenchments, gather RPGs, gather machine guns, gather IEDs, booby trap areas, know the area and get to know the area like the back of your hand, with all of that time to prep from a defensive position, you can unleash casualties upon your opponent. Maybe it won't be possible for them to keep these border areas. Maybe it won't be possible to keep some of these villages that they might fight over. But they certainly are going to give some amount of casualties to the Israeli, and I don't think it's going to be pretty, and I don't think the Israelis are going to like it. And certainly after a year of fighting in Gaza, in slight raids or a certain amount of raids into the West Bank, you know, that takes a toll. That has an effect on morale. It has an effect on supplies. The longer this war goes on, the more resources the Israelis are going to have to dump into it. Not just material resources, as in artillery shells and rockets, but also human resources. And the longer they have reservists mobilized, the longer that they are out of the economy. And I would say that the reservists versus the professional soldiers, the reservists, well, how do I put this? Reservists, conscripts, anybody that's not a professional soldier, on average, is not going to have the same morale. It's definitely not going to have the same training. And if something happens to them, tends to be treated differently by societies than if something happens to a professional soldier. And now I might be projecting my experience here in Ukraine a little bit, but I do think that is the case. And I don't think that if Israel even wanted to, they could necessarily take all of southern Lebanon right now, considering like the combat that they've been doing for a year and the fact that they would have to hold on to it. And that's going to be the really, really tricky part. But this limited operation, until I know the full scope of it, I can't make any estimation. And I'm certainly not like a top regional expert. But what I will say is that it's going to be painful. There's no way to get around the fact that it's going to be painful. And the only thing you can do is make sure that you have the resources, if you're going to carry out the operation, to try to do as much damage before your troops have to do the close quarters building clearing, because Israel has the advantage in the sky. Israel has the advantage when it comes to long-range strikes. For as much noise that is made about Hezbollah's rockets, at the end of the day, they're not very expensive. They're not very accurate. They have a lot of them because they're cheap, and they're meant to be fired in gigantic waves to overpower the Israeli air defense system. Not to be like a incredible like Hellfire missile that he doesn't even explode, just cuts you in half with the blade. No, the point is that you get a bunch of them and you fire them at one target with a general radius, a general idea of what it will hit, and hope for the best. And hope for the best. And that's a lot different than having a functional air force, air defense system, etc. Hamas doesn't have it. Hezbollah doesn't have it. Hell, Iran doesn't really even have it. Iran, I don't think, has an air defense system that can stand up to the Israelis and what they're going to try to dish out. Because I do think they're going to hit them at home. Question of how they're going to hit them, how hard they're going to hit them, that's still up for debate. That's still a big question mark. But this means that the air war, the Israelis already won. When it comes to the rocket war, I don't think there's really a way for Hezbollah to win in the long run when it comes to strategic damage. Maybe terror, maybe an overwhelming the air defense system, but when it comes to like taking out total amount of military installations and trying to cripple the Israeli military, that's a totally different thing. But the ground war, you need infantry to take a building, and a machine gun is a machine gun. A rifle is a rifle, and if the man is trained well on it, if he's kept it clean, and he knows his area, a man can kill you, as has already happened. Let's watch a little report on what happened so far.
News out of the Middle East. Israel has just announced that 7 more of its soldiers have been killed in ground operations in southern Lebanon, bringing the total number to 8. CNN Chief National Security Analyst Jim Sciutto is in Tel Aviv. And Jim, this comes as Israel is sending thousands more troops to take part in a ground fight in Lebanon.
This is a significant loss for the Israeli military. 8 just in the first couple of days of this ground incursion into southern Lebanon, which we should note, it's the first time in 18 years, you have to go back to the 2006 war, for when Israel last sent significant numbers of ground forces into southern Lebanon. And to have this death toll this early in those operations is a measure of the danger on the ground there as Israel confronts Hezbollah, not just from the air, as we've seen with a significant number of airstrikes, but in ground combat. This comes as Israel is considering retaliation for last night's unprecedented missile attack. Some 180 ballistic missiles fired here at Israel, the vast majority of them shot down, but some striking the ground, including around us here in central Tel Aviv last night. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz of Florida. He serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me.
First, I want to begin with this significant Israeli loss. Our understanding, this was in a firefight between an Israeli commando unit and presumably Hezbollah fighters on the other side of the border. This brings back echoes of the 2006 war, when Israel suffered significant casualties with an uncertain outcome after the end of that war. It lasted about a month. I wonder, in your view...
Sorry to pause, but air raid alert is still on, and the UAVs are apparently heading towards Kiev from the direction of Burvi. I don't see anything else on this, though, so I don't know anything about interceptions or any other data. I'm waiting for any update, because the sooner the air alert is done, the better, because then I can stop listening. I always listen, because don't trust the government, okay? But, it'd be better to know that it was safe, because I am near a window. And that is not exactly safety protocol. Don't be near windows during air raids. This is a do as I say, not as I do situation.
Of the 2006 war, when Israel suffered significant casualties with an uncertain outcome after the end of that war. It lasted about a month. I wonder, in your view, does this human cost so early on signal that this operation might be more dangerous than some had imagined?
Okay, what does that even mean? What does it mean, like some had imagined? 8 people died so far, and it was an ambush, and that's, bad for the Israelis. He's talking to a hardcore supporter of Israel right now, Jared Moskowitz, which also, his committee meetings are entertaining, at least, him watching. Look, anybody that can get under James Comer's skin is not completely oppositional to me. Okay. What imagination of this war led to no Israeli military deaths? There's no imagine. I don't know what level you'd have to be, where you'd have to be so far up the Israeli military's ass to think that they were going to go into Lebanon, into a ground war where they're going to have to fight for houses and buildings that they've built up for a decade, and they're not going to take casualties. Of course, they're going to take less casualties than Hezbollah. Of course, they're not going to, Hezbollah doesn't have an air force. They don't have the same type of munitions. They don't have the same research budget. But at the end of the day, they are the largest and most well-funded non-governmental military organization in the world. And I mean, if we had U.S. Marines cleaning Raqqa of ISIS, no matter how much better trained our soldiers are, as if they know the streets better, they have some level of, of resistance that they've built up and prepared. It's gonna cost lives to clear those buildings. So I don't know what people imagined or what he's talking about when it comes to, oh, is this more deadly than people imagined? You had 8 people die so far. If you think 8 is a lot for this war, you're gonna have a terrible, terrible time, because yes, people are gonna die in street to street, building to building fighting, even with aerial bombardments, artillery bombardments, or missile bombardments coming before the house clearing.
Well, no, I think the Israelis know that it's dangerous, but I think they understand that it's more dangerous to allow Iran.
Like, Hezbollah has better funding than Hamas. They should have access to better weapons than Hamas. It's easier to get weapons to Hezbollah than it is to get weapons to Hamas because of the blockade.
And
part of the reason why Israel threatened, there was an Iranian plane coming to land in the civilian airport in Beirut, and the Israelis said, if that plane lands there, we were going to bomb it, we're going to blow it up, we're not going to, and they turned around. So they're trying to do what they can to strain resources from going to Hezbollah now, but they have cleaner passageways or easier passageways than Hamas does.
Proxies on your border, the appeasement of Iran and its proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, can no longer stand. We saw this actually just yesterday in Tel Aviv with a terrorist attack that's killing people, that were just on the high-speed rail. And so this mission is going to be dangerous. It is limited in scope. It is trying to push Hezbollah back away from the border so that people in Israel can return to their homes. Remember, Hezbollah has fired 9,000 rockets into northern Israel. 50,000 plus people have had to flee their homes there. So Israel is trying to establish some sort of to normalize the situation in the north so that people can return to their homes, but also to reestablish deterrence with Iran and its proxies.
I understand that. I've spent a lot of time in northern Israel and talked to some of those families.
Okay, I do want to throw out there, if you blow up Nasrallah and you assassinate Hamas's political leader in Tehran, and then you bomb already as much as they have for over a year, I think part of the reason why the Iranians have responded the way they have and the Hezbollah has responded the way they have, which I'm not saying has been completely reserved, but much more reserved than could have been, is the fact that Israel has pretty strong deterrence, and they've increased the deterrence quite significantly. So my question would be, what more deterrence do they get through the invasion? You could say that they destroy Hezbollah's capacity, but that's different than deterrence. Deterrence is you're stopping the Iranians. You're trying to stop the Iranians from attacking you or doing something to you because you want to intimidate them through your force, your ability to use force, and the size of your force. But if you just use the force and smash, you're not deterring Hezbollah by invading and fighting with Hezbollah. And like you've just started the war. That's a little separate from deterrence. Like if the Ukrainians in 2021 was like, oh no, we're going to be invaded, let's deter the Russians, and then invaded Russia, that's not deterrent. You could make an argument for deterring the Iranians, but it also then a missile strike followed. So it makes sense that after a missile attack from the Iranians, that Israel would feel that they have to strike in some way inside Israel to make them see that they cannot do such things like that unchallenged to establish some basic level of deterrence. But when we're talking about like an invasion of, southern Lebanon, I don't see how that plays into the framework.
Families who have left. But as you know, Israel's track record of attempting exactly the same is spotty at best. It occupied Lebanon for 18 years, from 1982 to 2000. Then again had the war in 2006, perhaps caused some damage, some losses for Hezbollah, but Hezbollah lived to survive another day. And I just wonder, given the parallel efforts for some sort of negotiated agreement where perhaps the Lebanese military takes over control for southern Lebanon, might be a more lasting path rather than military action alone.
Yeah, no, I'm not against that. I think you're right. I think we'll have to get to a negotiated solution at some point. But in the meantime, I think Israel wants to degrade the amount of weapons that are on their border. Tens of thousands of missiles and rockets, pretty advanced stuff, not like Hamas. And Israel wants to go and degrade some of that capacity before we get to that situation. No one's talking about occupying Lebanon, right? This is a limited mission, a limited incursion, trying to...
Okay, well, if they invade and then destroy these things on the border and then leave, if there's not a settlement and the war just continues, what stops Hezbollah from just coming in, rebuilding infrastructure, and continuing? Or, and I mean, this is a possibility too, a lot of these rockets are not fired from like underground, they're not fired from like underground missile silos, and they're like these they're put on the backs of trucks, then they're wheeled around, bumping around, and then they fire them in a general area. They'll still have trucks, they'll still have rockets, and so if you have those two things and put them together, it's a mobile artillery system. Mobile being the key word there. They can move it away from the south, and then they can move it back down into the south. And so if they leave the south, then they could just bring those artillery back up to the border, then bomb northern Israel, and then say, look, we're still here. Israel was here for 6 months, but hey, we're still here. We're still Hezbollah. They took Nasrallah, but we will not let them take our ability to strike back at these Zionists, yada, yada, yada.
Restore some of them.
There could be an interest in, depending on how bad they whoop them, if they whoop them hard, and Hezbollah like holding themselves back until they rebuild their forces enough to then say, okay, we have enough here that we have some weight behind us, that the Israelis have to take us seriously. But that's a different question entirely than just taking over the border areas.
Some of the balance out there, but also, Jim, this is unprecedented territory. We had 180 ballistic missiles launched at Israel yesterday, the second time that has happened. This is all connected. It's not happening in a vacuum, as you know.
Let's get more now from Nick Robertson, who's in Tel Aviv, and Arlette Saenz, who's at the White House. Nick, let's start first with you. We're getting these numbers of 8 IDF soldiers killed in that fighting. Tell us more.
Yeah, we know that some of them are from the Golani Brigade, which is one of the sort of elite, most battle-hardened, battle-trained units, the Igos unit and the Yahlom unit as well. It's not clear precisely where this took place, although we do understand a rough location of some clashes, at least along the border in the early hours of today. Hezbollah says that they have struck IDF forces in 3 different areas, 3 different villages along the border. The IDF has said that these were localized and targeted raids. In fact, the IDF releasing video of troops walking through the sort of rugged countryside, up hills, going into houses, searching houses. But this is a very deadly day. A local hospital near that front line at the border had declared a mass casualty event a little earlier in the day. They had received some of the casualties, but this number we're now hearing, the IDF saying 8 soldiers killed. We also understand that many of these soldiers were captains, majors. They were of relatively senior rank. Not uncommon for the IDF to have them in the front lines, leading the fight, but a significant blow for experienced troops to be caught in this way, and a potential political blow for the Prime Minister as well. This is not what he or the IDF would have hoped for on the second day only of operations, ground operations inside of Lebanon. There's been so much talk about the lessons learned in 2006 of Israel's incursion during the 34-day war there of 1982,
but assuming that only the Israelis learned lessons from 2000, okay, I hate to be the one that bursts the Hezbollah bubble here, but Hezbollah's performance during the 2006 war is heavily overblown, largely by Hezbollah, their subsidiary media conglomerate, like the people who back them in the media world, and their simps. Sorry to say this, that's just the truth. You can go look at it yourself. If somebody wants to come here and tell me, no, really, Hezbollah, actually, their resistance was the strongest. If somebody wants to do that, you can email me at DylanBurnsTV@gmail.com. You can try to convince me otherwise. I'm not saying they completely crashed and burned. I'm just saying that their victory was kind of overblown. And in that time, just like Israel has, they would presumably be learning, building, trying to be like, okay, this didn't work in 2006. Let's see what works next time. Because they remember 20 years of occupation of the South from the Israeli invasion in 1982. And then they let go. And then a few years later, they invade again. And so they learned from that. Then they struggle in 2006. And in that time, they learn. And in that time, they were massively funded by Iran and became the largest non-governmental terrorist organization, non-governmental fighter organization, military organization, I don't care, whatever word you want to use, the largest non-governmental military organization on the planet. So I think they probably learned as well. And if you're going to be that, you do not eliminate that. Definitely if they have tunnels and underground bunkers dug everywhere, you're not going to just be able to do that with air power and munitions. And if you do, not only is it going to take an immense amount of munitions, it's going to have an immense non-governmental terrorist organization. There can be governmental well, it depends on your definition of terrorist, doesn't it? Because most definitions of terrorist implies that it has to be non-governmental, but not all definitions of terror. Okay, whatever. I'm getting diverted here. Point is, it isn't just the Israelis who learn.
Israel's troops on the ground inside Lebanon until the year 2000, 18 years they were there. Israel took high casualties when the troops were on the ground in Lebanon. And this is going to be a bitter reminder of that as these troops just go across the border. And of course, Hezbollah has been aware for the...
Here's a question though. If the casualties do start to rise, as they did last time, what is the reaction from the Israeli public going to be? Because currently, the reaction of the Israeli public is not really unanimous, but much more positive than the incursion into Gaza. Because the incursion into Gaza, that's, well, negotiate, we need to get the hostages out. It's mostly around the hostages. It's mostly around the hostages. Like, we're not just going to be able to punch our way out of this conundrum. And the dilemma of the families, the tragedy of the families. Whereas in Lebanon, the majority of the Israeli public support it because they see, like, October 7th happens, worst terror attack in Israeli history, fucking horrific, 1,400, horrible, terrible amount of casualties, deaths, destruction. Majority were civilians. And then the day after, Hezbollah starts bombing the South in support of the Al-Aqsa flood, as Hezbollah called, not Hezbollah, Hamas called it. So right when that happened, the Israeli public in the north had to make a choice. Do they stay for the continuous rockets attacks or do they go? And most of them chose to go. And so the Israeli public wants those people, after a year of having the communities bombed and them leaving, to return to their homes. Hezbollah did not have to support Hamas on October 8th. They could have waited a year, a month, 2, 3 months. Okay, the war has gone too much after we're gonna. It was immediately they were in there. And so I think that immediate support after this horrific day in Israeli history, combined with the length of the displacement, has made it so that domestically, even though Netanyahu is still divided, even though the Likud party's polling is going up, the Likud party is now again the #1 polling party in Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu's stock is rising. People considered him politically dead before this, but now the war's been going on for almost a year, and now with the incursion in Lebanon, people don't know. But if the corpses start coming home, the graves start getting filled in, how long will the Israeli public support such an operation if the Israelis have to control these border outposts and border locations to keep Hezbollah down? Because if they just leave, and then we had all these deaths, like these 8 soldiers or whoever's going to come after, and then it's immediately followed by like their version of Grad rocket trucks just firing rockets over the border, what message does that send to the Israeli public? When Bibi is supposed to be the great protector, that's what he campaigned on. He's the longest Israeli prime minister in history. That was his message to the people when he was running again and again and again. It was foreign policy, it was strength, it was protection, it was security. And then you have the failure of October 7th, compounded with the failure of an operation in the north. Wouldn't it be good? Wouldn't it be good? Which could, of course, encourage the government to double down on a failing policy, or double down to see if double downing, maybe just more force would push them forward at all.
The potential for this military action targeting them. This is what the IDF has been saying, targeting Hezbollah installations along the border. And the expectation along the border, as we discovered when we talked to local people yesterday, is Hezbollah would have been planning for this and preparing for it.
All right, Nick Robertson, thank you so much for that reporting. Let's go now to Arlette Saenz, who's at the White House. And Arlette, we know that this administration, the Biden administration, is coordinating with Israel on whatever that response might be to Iran. What more are you learning?
Yeah, Jessica, senior U.S. officials continue to be in constant contact with their Israeli counterparts as they try to determine what the next steps in the Israelis' response to Iran will be. Now, President Biden is expected today to convene a call with the leaders of other G7 countries to specifically talk about the situation in the Middle East. That's according to a source familiar with the call. And it comes at a time as the U.S. and other allies are waiting to see exactly how Israel might respond. You have heard President Biden say that they support Israel and also want to keep these lines of communications open to try to determine these next steps.
Look, this is the scenario the Biden administration did not want. It's a month out from the election. The war is expanded into Lebanon. Now, it doesn't mean it's a full-blown regional war, but the war now includes more than 1 or 2 countries in the region. It's becoming more regional. Doesn't mean it's like all of the proxies have been activated in Iran and Israel is going blow to blow every day, but it's expanding, and the risks of something like that is going up. But think about it from Netanyahu's perspective. If there was a time to press, it would make sense for it to be now, politically speaking, and when it comes to American support. Because look at it from this perspective. Number one, the Republicans are going to support them in fighting Hamas at Gaza, in fighting the West Bank, and in fighting Hezbollah. They're going to support them because they want tough policies. They want to go strong. They want to go hard. And the policies that I was seeing, the statements that I was seeing, and the immediate aftermath of what was going on was bounce the rubble in Gaza. That was what I was hearing Lindsey Graham and others spouting off, right? So I don't think their problem is going to be, oh, okay, guys, let's reel it. No, it's going to be maybe even, hey, go harder here, or we're with you. So I don't think they have any worry from the Republican side. And there's, of course, domestic political reasons to be with that as well, with the evangelical community, etc. I don't want to get into the specifics there. And of course, the political influence the evangelicals have in that party and in the Trump movement specifically. He got more evangelical votes than Bush did. But on the other side with the Democrats, even if there's more opposition to both either Israeli behavior when it comes to bombing and the idea of what is and isn't an acceptable collateral damage, and there's a good way to fight and a bad way to fight, and that onward discussion. Even if, no matter how much critique there is from Rashida Tlaib and gang, Harris and Biden are terrified of being presented as weak in supporting Israel, as weak on an issue where people could, like, there's 440,000 Jewish voters in Pennsylvania, and the majority of them support Israel. There's political reasons there. Rolling the dice again on a candidate like Harris after they already rolled so many dice, she had such low favorability, but they rolled the dice and switched her out. There's never been something like this, but they rolled the dice and switched her out. Then they went for a relative unknown and Tim Walz. They rolled the dice, but it ended up working out. Then Harris ended up getting net favorability. Then they went forward with the debate and then challenged for a second debate and ended up working out. Now, how many political risks are they willing to stomach? And I think this is one that they're not. Maybe there'll be more flexibility and U.S. pressure after the war, but I also didn't see much real extension or stretching by the Biden administration to add pressure. Maybe that'll be different in a Harris administration where she's being advised by someone like Philip Gordon. I doubt it'll be that significantly different. But the point is, whatever wiggle room they do have or are willing to use, they're probably not going to do it a month from the election. They don't want to piss off those voters. They don't want to bring this front and center in the campaign. Not only the fact that it is expanding in the war, but the idea that they're being weak while it's expanding in the war. And when Donald Trump's already campaigning on the idea that it is their weakness that is causing this international chaos, if they do anything that could play into that, they could see that as electoral poison. And so I think from Netanyahu's perspective, the Republicans don't want to go after him, and the Democrats electorally cannot go after him. So if there's a moment to press the advantage, it's in the next month.
But one question going forward is what U.S. assistance in any type of response might look like. And you have heard publicly across the administration from here at the White House and at the State Department that the U.S. does believe there will be severe consequences for Iran following this attack. Take a listen to what the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan had to say on that matter.
This is a significant escalation by Iran. We have made clear that there will be consequences, severe consequences for this attack, and we will work with Israel to make that the case.
Now, so far, a senior U.S. official tells CNN that the U.S. does not believe that Israel has made their final determination about how they will proceed. There is a hope that there will be some consultation between the U.S. and Israel before they make any final decisions going forward. President Biden has said that he does plan to speak with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at some point. It's unclear exactly when that might come. But one big question is how much influence the U.S. will be able to have over this decision. You'll remember back in April when Iran had launched that barrage of missiles and drones against Israel that were ultimately thwarted by the U.S. And other allies, that at that time, President Biden had essentially told Netanyahu to take a win. You only saw a very limited response from Israel in that moment. Officials acknowledge that this situation is much different. So the administration is likely going to try to encourage the Israelis to take some type of measured response when they do, in fact, plan their response to Iran's attack. Yesterday, the State Department...
I think they're going to strike inside of Iran. I think the Israelis are going to respond to Iran striking inside of Israel, to them striking back. And I don't know when they're going to do it, but if I had to guess, I'd say within the next 24 hours. I mean, I hate to guess. Let me just say, speculation. I can tell you what the speculation is based off of. Last time, the Israeli government was critiqued not only for not being as strong as some in the Israeli right, in Israeli society wanted the government to respond last time they had this type of confrontation with Iran, but also, if they are not fast, then there could be some confusion about whether or not it's a response to this or if there's a response to something else. So if you want to have the most diplomatic clarity and answer the Israeli public's concern about a lack of response or a lack of deterrence, the sooner the better. And so I don't see them waiting past this week or weekend. And the sooner the better, which is why I made the 24 hours prediction. But let me just say, it's still pure speculation. I'm not in the know in that way, at least not over there.
Would not say whether they believed Iran might target a nuclear, or Israel might target nuclear facilities in Iran. They simply said they wouldn't comment on that matter. They weren't ruling anything in or ruling anything out. But it does present a very tricky dynamic for not just Israel, but also the U.S. as they're trying to prevent this from really escalating into all-out war.
All-out war in the Middle East. Already all-out war between Hezbollah. Very soon. All-out war between Hamas, PFLP, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Iran would make it still 10 times worse. The situation's bad. The situation has gotten worse. But always remember, the situation can get even worse.